The wind carried the smell of death across the valley. Elder stood alone on the broken steps of the great temple, looking out at what remained of his world. Once, this valley had been filled with life. Gardens had stretched from the temple walls to the distant mountains. Rivers of crystal-clear water had flowed through the city below. Children had played in the streets while their parents worked and laughed and lived. Now there was only silence, and Ash was old even by the standards of his people. They lived for many centuries, and he had seen more than most. His skin, once smooth and dark like polished stone, was now cracked with age. His 4 arms hung tired at his sides. His amber eyes, which had once glowed bright with hope, were dim now. He remembered the world before the harvesters came. They had been a peaceful people. They had no weapons, no armies, no need for such things. They had built beautiful cities and created wonderful art. They had studied the stars and dreamed of the universe beyond their small world. They had believed that life was good and that the future would be bright. They had been wrong. The harvesters arrived 12 years ago. Their ships blocked out the sun when they first appeared in the sky. Each vessel was massive beyond belief, larger than the greatest mountains of. They hung in the air like metal moons, cold and silent and terrible. At first, they tried to communicate. They sent messages of peace and welcome. They offered friendship and knowledge. They hoped that these visitors from the stars would be kind. The harvesters did not respond with words. They responded with fire. The first cities fell within days. Millions died in the initial attacks. They had no way to fight back. Their technology was advanced in many ways, but they had never built weapons. They had never needed to learn the art of war. The harvesters did not come to conquer. They did not come to rule. They came to take. They wanted the minerals buried deep beneath the surface of. They wanted the rare elements that made the planet so valuable. They wanted everything, and they did not care who stood in their way. To the harvesters, they were not people. They were pests, insects to be crushed underfoot while the real work was done. Closed his eyes and listened to the wind. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the deep rumble of harvester machines digging into the earth. They worked day and night, never stopping, never resting. They had already stripped the northern continent bare. Now they moved south, closer to the last remaining settlements. There were fewer than 2 million of his people left. Once, there had been billions. The sound of footsteps made turn. A young woman climbed the temple steps toward him. Her name was, and she was one of the few who still believed in the old ways. While others had abandoned the temples and the ancient teachings, remained faithful. "Elder," she said, bowing her head in respect, "I bring news from the eastern settlements." Already knew what she would say. He had seen the signal fires go dark the night before. Each fire represented a village, a community, a group of survivors trying to hold on to life. When a fire went dark, it meant only one thing. "How many?" he asked quietly. "We do not know for certain. Perhaps 3,000, perhaps more." His voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her pain. The harvesters needed the land for a new mining operation. They gave no warning. Nodded slowly. This was the way of things now. The died and the harvesters continued their work. There was no justice, no mercy, no hope. Or was there? Hesitated before speaking again. "There is something else, Elder, something strange." "What is it?" "Our long-range sensors detected something entering the system. Ships, many of them." His heart began to beat faster. He turned to face fully, his dim eyes suddenly bright with a light that had not been there for years. "Tell me more," he demanded. "They came through the outer boundary several hours ago. Our observers counted at least 40 vessels. They are moving toward our planet." "The celestial ones," whispered. Every child knew the prophecy of stars. It was the oldest and most sacred of all the ancient texts, written by the first seer thousands of years before the harvesters ever came. The prophecy spoke of a time of great darkness, when they would face destruction at the hands of evil forces. But in that darkest hour, beings of light would descend from the heavens to save them. The celestial ones, the prophecy called them, perfect beings with technology that seemed like magic. They would come in vessels that shone like stars, wielding power beyond imagination. They would drive back the darkness and restore to its former glory. For 12 years they had prayed for the celestial ones to come. For 12 years they had watched the skies and hoped. Many had lost faith. Many had decided that the prophecy was nothing but an old story, a fairy tale told to comfort children, but had never stopped believing. "What do the ships look like?" he asked, his voice trembling with hope. His expression became uncertain. "That is the strange part, Elder. The ships are not what we expected." "What do you mean?" "The prophecy describes vessels of pure light, graceful and beautiful beyond words. These ships are different. They are made of metal. They are angular and rough. Some of them appear to be damaged." Paused, choosing her next words carefully. "They look almost primitive." Frowned. This was not what the prophecy had promised. The celestial ones were supposed to be perfect, their technology far beyond anything they could imagine. These ships sounded crude, ugly even. "Perhaps the prophecy was wrong about some details," he said slowly. "Or perhaps these are not the celestial ones at all." "Then who are they?" Had no answer. He turned back to look at the ruined valley, at the ash and death that surrounded them. In the distance, harvester machines continued their endless work, tearing his world apart piece by piece. It did not matter who these newcomers were, he realized. It did not matter if they matched the prophecy or not. They were dying. Every day more of his people were killed. Every day more of his world was destroyed. They had no army, no weapons, no way to fight back. If these strangers from the stars chose to help, then perhaps there was still hope. If they chose to ignore the suffering of, or worse, to join the harvesters, then they would simply die a little faster. Either way, the end result would be the same. "Watch the ships," told, "track their movements, tell me everything that happens." "Yes, Elder." As hurried away, lowered himself to his knees on the cold stone steps. He pressed his forehead to the ground in the ancient gesture of prayer, speaking words that his ancestors had spoken for thousands of years. "Hear me, spirits of the stars," he whispered. "We are your children and we are dying. Send us salvation. Send us hope. Send us anyone who might hear our cries and answer." The wind howled around him, carrying ash and dust across the broken temple. Somewhere in the void of space, 47 ships flew toward. They were not vessels of light. They were not crewed by perfect beings. They were battered, damaged, crewed by creatures of flesh and blood who had problems and fears and doubts of their own. They were human. And they were about to change everything. Commander Park had not slept in 36 hours. She stood on the bridge of the UENS Defiance, her hands gripped tightly behind her back as she stared at the main. Coffee had stopped working days ago. Now she ran on willpower alone, forcing her tired body to keep moving, keep thinking, keep leading. The Defiance was the flagship of the United Earth Navy's 3rd Expeditionary Fleet. 3 years ago, they had left Earth with high hopes and grand dreams. Humanity's first true deep space exploration mission. 52 ships carrying the best in that Earth had to offer, sent out to find new worlds, new resources, new allies among the stars. It had not gone as planned. Space was vast and empty and cruel. 2 ships had been lost to equipment failures. 3 more had been destroyed by a hostile alien species near the edge of explored territory. Food supplies had run low. Fuel cells had begun to fail. Morale had dropped so far that sometimes wondered if her crew would simply give up and let themselves drift into the void. But they had pushed on. They had to. Earth was counting on them. Was not a tall woman. She was not physically imposing in any way. She had short black hair that she kept practical and simple, dark eyes that showed her exhaustion, and a face that might have been pretty once but was now hard and tired. She was 43 years old and felt like she was 90. But when she spoke, people listened. "Report," she said, her voice calm and steady. Lieutenant looked up from his sensor station. He was young, barely 30, with the kind of eager energy that remembered having once upon a time. The 3 years in space had worn him down too, but his eyes still held a spark of curiosity that reminded why they had come out here in the first place. "Confirmed contact on the third planet," Commander said. "Atmosphere is breathable, surface temperature is within acceptable range, and there are definitely people down there." "People?" "Intelligent life, ma'am, cities, technology, population in the millions at least," hesitated. "But something is wrong." Walked over to his station, looking down at the data streaming across his screens. "Explain." "The cities are damaged. Many of them appear to be destroyed completely, and those large vessels in orbit," pointed to a cluster of contacts on his display. "They're not from this planet. Their technology is completely different from anything on the surface." "Invaders." "It looks that way, Commander. We're picking up what appears to be mining operations across the northern continent, large-scale extraction of minerals and other resources, and the local population." His voice trailed off. "Lieutenant, tell me." "They're being killed, ma'am, systematically. Our sensors are picking up mass graves, destroyed settlements. These people are being wiped out while their planet is stripped bare." Felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had seen many things in her years of service. She had fought pirates in the asteroid belt. She had survived 2 ship crashes. She had watched friends die in the empty void between stars, but this was something different. This was genocide. "What do we know about the invaders?" she asked. Chief Petty Officer answered from the weapons station. She was older than but younger than, a solid woman with steady hands and a reputation for never missing a shot. "They're big, Commander, really big. 12 capital ships, each one larger than anything in our fleet. Hundreds of smaller craft, and their technology better than ours. Much better, their shields are more advanced, their weapons are more powerful, their engines are faster," shook her head. "If we fight them, we'll lose." Nodded slowly. She had expected as much. Humanity was still new to the stars. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 20 years ago. They were children compared to races that had been sailing the void for thousands of years. "Options?" she asked, looking around the bridge. Nobody spoke at first. Then Lieutenant Lee, the navigation officer, raised his hand hesitantly. "We could leave, Commander, chart a course around this system and continue our mission. It's not our fight." It was the logical choice, the safe choice. 47 ships against 12 superior vessels and hundreds of fighters. The math was simple. If they fought, they would die. But could not stop thinking about the data on screen. Mass graves, destroyed cities, millions of people being slaughtered while invaders stole their world. "What do we know about the local population?" she asked quietly. "Not much," admitted. "They appear to be humanoid, 4 arms instead of 2, tall and slender, no military technology that we can detect. They seem to be a peaceful species." "Peaceful?" "Yes, Commander. It appears they have no weapons, no armies, no way to defend themselves." Closed her eyes. She thought about Earth. She thought about all the wars and conflicts and horrors that humans had inflicted on each other throughout history. She thought about the times when innocent people had died while others stood by and watched, too afraid or too selfish to help. She thought about what humanity was supposed to be, not what it had been but what it could be, what it should be. "If we leave," she said slowly, "what happens to them?" Nobody answered, they all knew. Opened her eyes and looked at her crew. These were good people, tired and scared and far from home, but good. They had followed her for 3 years through the darkest parts of space. They had trusted her with their lives. Now she was about to ask them to risk those lives for strangers they had never met. She did not have the right to make that decision for them, but she had to make it anyway. That was what it meant to be a commander. "I know what the regulations say," she began. "I know what makes tactical sense. I know that we're outmatched and that fighting here would probably get most of us killed." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But I also know what I believe in, what we all believe in. The reason we joined the Navy, the reason we left Earth." She walked to the center of the bridge, standing tall despite her exhaustion. "We came out here to explore, to discover, to represent the best of humanity among the stars. If we turn away from this, if we leave these people to die when we have the power to help them, then what are we? What does humanity become?" Spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "A species that watches genocide and does nothing." "Exactly," nodded. "I won't give that order, I can't. So here is what we are going to do. We are going to fight. We are going to do everything in our power to save these people. And if we die trying, then at least we die as humans should, standing up for what is right." She looked around the bridge one last time. "Anyone who disagrees is free to speak now. This is not an order. This is a choice." Silence. Then one by one her crew began to nod. Some had tears in their eyes. Some had grim smiles on their faces, but all of them agreed. "Signal the fleet," commanded. "All hands to battle stations. We attack at dawn." The 47 ships of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet began to move. They were small and battered and far from perfect, but they carried something that could not be measured by sensors or calculated by computers. They carried hope. They had never seen war. Elder stood at the highest point of the great temple, surrounded by hundreds of his people who had gathered to watch the sky. Word had spread quickly through the remaining settlements. Strange ships had entered their system. Something was about to happen. Nobody knew if it would be salvation or destruction. The morning sun had just risen over the eastern mountains when the first ships appeared. They came from beyond the clouds, small and angular, made of dark metal that reflected no light. They looked nothing like the vessels described in the ancient prophecy. They were ugly and rough and clearly damaged from long travel. But they were not alone. Stood beside her, 4 hands pressed together in prayer. "There are so many of them," she whispered. 47, replied. He had counted them carefully as they entered atmosphere, against 12 of the Harvester capital ships and hundreds of fighters. "They cannot win. No, they cannot." And yet the strange ships kept coming. They formed into attack formations, spreading out across the sky in patterns that did not understand. Military patterns, warrior patterns. These beings, whoever they were, knew how to fight. The harvesters responded immediately. The first energy beam came from the largest harvester vessel. It was bright blue, almost beautiful, a line of pure destruction that crossed the sky in an instant. It struck one of the strange ships directly. Shields flared and held for a moment, then collapsed. The ship exploded in a ball of fire and debris. More beams followed. The harvesters had been caught off guard by the attack, but they recovered quickly. Their weapons were superior in every way. Each blast found its target. Each target was destroyed. 3 ships fell, then 5, then 7. Watched in horror as the strange fleet was torn apart. Whoever these beings were, whatever hope they had brought, it was dying in the sky above his world. "They should run," said, her voice breaking. "Why do they not run?" Had no answer. The logical thing to do would be to retreat, to flee, to save what remained of their fleet. Any sensible commander would have recognized that the battle was lost. But the strange ships did not retreat. They pushed forward, directly into the fire. On the bridge of the Defiance, Commander Park gripped her command chair as another explosion rocked the ship. Warning lights flashed across every console. Damage reports flooded in from every deck. 7 of her ships were already gone. More were failing. "Shields at 30%, reported, her voice strained but steady. "We cannot take another direct hit." "Then don't let them hit us," replied. "Evasive pattern 7, Tell the fleet to scatter and reform at coordinates Delta. Commander, we've lost the horizon and the dawn's light. The Mercury is venting atmosphere. Captain is requesting permission to withdraw. Tell him to hold the line. Lieutenant looked up from his station, blood running from a cut on his forehead. Ma'am, their flagship is targeting us directly. We have maybe 30 seconds before they fire. Closed her eyes for just a moment. 30 seconds. Not enough time to run, not enough time to hide, but maybe enough time to do something else. All ships, she commanded, focus fire on the flagship's engine array. Everything we have. Every missile, every cannon, every weapon system. Target those engines. Ma'am, our weapons can barely scratch their shields. Then we scratch them until they bleed. The human fleet obeyed. 40 ships turned as one, pouring their combined firepower into a single point on the massive Harvester flagship. Kinetic rounds hammered against energy shields. Nuclear missiles detonated in brilliant flashes. Laser batteries burned through the void. For a moment, nothing happened. The Harvester shields held firm. The flagship continued to power its main weapon. Then a crack appeared. It was small at first, just a tiny fluctuation in the enemy's defensive screen, but the humans had seen it. They had learned something important. These invaders were not invincible. Their technology was superior, but it was not perfect. They could be hurt. Keep firing, shouted. Don't stop, don't ever stop. The battle shifted. The human ships began to change their tactics. Instead of attacking in straight lines, they moved in chaotic patterns that the Harvesters could not predict. They used the debris of their fallen comrades as cover, hiding behind broken hulls and scattered metal. They targeted weak points in the enemy formation, slipping small fighters through gaps to strike at vulnerable systems. The Harvesters had never faced an enemy like this. Their previous conquests had been easy. Peaceful species with no military knowledge, no fighting experience, no understanding of war. They had not expected resistance. They certainly had not expected ferocity. The humans fought like cornered animals. They fought with desperation and fury and a complete disregard for their own survival. When one ship was damaged beyond repair, its crew would often aim it directly at an enemy vessel and accelerate to full speed. The first ram attack took out a Harvester cruiser. The captain of the human destroyer Herald, knowing his ship was doomed, drove it straight into the enemy's command deck. Both vessels vanished in a massive explosion that lit up the sky. More followed. On the temple steps, watched in awe as the strange beings sacrificed themselves again and again. He had lived for centuries. He had studied the philosophies of 1,000 thinkers. He had believed that he understood the nature of courage and honor. He understood nothing. These creatures were dying. They were dying in huge numbers, their ships burning and breaking apart, their bodies scattered across the void. But they kept fighting. They kept pressing forward. They refused to accept defeat even when defeat was certain. "What are they?" whispered beside him. "What kind of beings would do this?" The battle raged for 3 hours. By the end of the first hour, half the human fleet was destroyed. By the end of the second hour, only 23 ships remained. But the Harvesters had suffered too. 4 of their capital ships were gone, including 2 that had been rammed by dying human vessels. Their fighter screens had been decimated by small human craft that attacked in suicidal waves. In the third hour, everything changed. Commander, bleeding from wounds she did not remember receiving, stared at the tactical display through swollen eyes. Her ship was barely functional. Life support was failing. Half her crew was dead or injured, but she had seen something, a weakness in the Harvester flagship's defenses. "There," she said, pointing at the screen. "Their shield generator is exposed. When they charge their main weapon, power diverts from that section." "Ma'am, that's their most heavily protected area. We'd have to get past all their remaining fighters." "Then we get past them," stood, ignoring the pain that shot through her broken ribs. Signal all remaining ships. One final push. Everything we have left." The surviving human vessels gathered for a last desperate charge. They were battered and broken, crewed by exhausted people who had already given everything they had. But they answered the call. They flew straight at the flagship, through walls of enemy fire, through explosions and debris and death. Ships fell around them. Friends died, but they kept going. When the flagship's main weapon began to charge, its shields flickered. In that moment of weakness, the remaining human missiles found their target. The explosion was visible from the planet's surface. The Harvester flagship broke apart slowly, its massive hull splitting into pieces that spiraled down toward the atmosphere below. The remaining Harvester vessels, suddenly without leadership, hesitated for a crucial moment. Then they ran. The invaders fled, jumping to faster-than-light speeds and disappearing into the void. They left behind wreckage and fire and thousands of dead. But they left. On the temple steps, Elder fell to his knees. Around him, thousands began to weep. They had watched their world die slowly for 12 years. Now, impossibly, they had watched it survive. "It is over," said, her voice filled with wonder. "They won, the strangers won." Looked up at the sky, where human ships drifted among the debris of battle. 19 vessels remained out of 47, more than half their fleet destroyed, thousands of lives lost. For strangers, for people they had never met. Not strangers, whispered, something else, something new. He did not yet know the word for what these beings were, but he would learn. They called themselves human. The shuttle landed roughly in the valley, below the great temple. Commander Park was the first to step out. She moved slowly, carefully, each step sending pain shooting through her battered body. 3 of her ribs were broken. Her left arm was wrapped in emergency bandages that covered burns she did not remember receiving. A deep cut on her forehead had been sealed with medical glue, but it still throbbed with every heartbeat. She should have been in the medical bay. The doctors had told her to rest, to let others handle the first contact. She had ignored them. After everything her people had sacrificed, she would be the one to meet the aliens they had saved. Behind her, a small team of soldiers and officers formed up. Lieutenant was among them, along with Chief Petty Officer and a handful of others who could still walk. They all looked terrible, dirty, bloody, exhausted beyond words, but they stood tall. The air of tasted strange. It was breathable, but there was something different about it, a sweetness that reminded of flowers after rain. The gravity was slightly lighter than Earth's, which helped her injured body but made her feel unsteady. Around them, the valley stretched in all directions, could see the scars of war everywhere. Buildings had been destroyed, fields had been burned. The ground itself was torn and broken in places where harvester machines had begun their work. But there were also signs of life, plants growing in the ash, small creatures moving through the rubble, and in the distance, figures emerging from hiding places to stare at the strange beings who had fallen from the sky. Commander said quietly, "They're coming." Looked up and saw them. Hundreds were descending from the temple, moving slowly through the valley toward the human landing party. They were tall, much taller than humans, with 4 arms and skin that looked like dark polished stone. Their eyes glowed soft amber in the morning light. At the front of the group walked 2 figures. One was ancient, clearly the oldest being had ever seen. His skin was cracked with age, and he moved with difficulty, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of wisdom beyond years. The other was younger, a female with smooth, dark skin and eyes that burned with curiosity. Took a deep breath and stepped forward to meet them. The old one stopped a few meters away. He studied in silence for a long moment. She let him look. She knew how she must appear to him. Small, fragile, covered in blood and burns. Not the mighty savior of prophecy, just a tired woman in a torn uniform. When the old one finally spoke, his voice was deep and resonant. The translator device in his ear converted his words to Korean with only a slight delay. You are not the celestial ones. It was not a question, shook her head. No, we're not. Then what are you? Thought about how to answer. What were they? Explorers, soldiers, fools who had thrown away their lives for people they did not know. We're human, she said finally. We come from a planet called Earth, very far from here. We were passing through your system when we saw what was happening. Passing through, the old one seemed to consider this, and yet you stopped, you fought, your people died. Yes. Why? The question hung in the air between them. Could feel her crew watching her, waiting for her answer. She could feel the weight of every life that had been lost in the battle above this world. 28 ships, more than 6,000 human beings. Why? Where we come from, began slowly, we have a history, a long and often terrible history. We have done great things and awful things. We have built wonders and we have destroyed each other in wars without meaning. We have been both the best and the worst that intelligent beings can be. She paused, searching for the right words. But through all of that, we have also developed ideas, beliefs about what is right and wrong, about what matters. One of the strongest beliefs we have is that when you see evil happening, when you see innocent people being hurt, you have a responsibility to help, even if it's dangerous, even if it costs you everything. Even for strangers, the old one asked, people you have never met, species you did not know existed. Especially for strangers, smiled weakly. We're not perfect. We don't always live up to our ideals. We fail more often than we succeed. But we keep trying, we have to keep trying. Otherwise, what's the point of being human? The old one was silent for a long time. Around him, the other murmured among themselves. Could not understand their words, but she sensed that they were struggling to comprehend what she had told them. Finally, the old one spoke again. My name is. I am the elder of this temple and one of the last spiritual leaders of my people. Commander Park, United Earth Navy. Commander Park, pronounce the name carefully. I have lived for many centuries. I have studied the ancient texts and the prophecies of my ancestors. I believe that I understood the universe and my place in it. He reached out with one of his 4 hands and gently touched his shoulder. His skin was rough but warm. I was wrong. The prophecy spoke of beings of light, perfect and powerful beyond imagination. It spoke of salvation through strength, through might, through overwhelming force. His amber eyes looked into hers. Instead, we received you, small, fragile, bleeding, dying. I'm sorry we're not what you hoped for, said quietly. Do not apologize. His voice became fierce. I have watched my people die for 12 years. I have prayed for salvation that never came. I had begun to lose hope, to believe that the universe was cruel and empty and without meaning. He gestured to the sky, where the wreckage of human and harvester ships still drifted among the clouds. Then you appeared. You saw our suffering and you could not turn away. You threw yourselves against an enemy you could not defeat and you defeated them anyway. You died for us, not because you were commanded to, not because some prophecy told you to, but because you chose to. The young female beside stepped forward. Her name, would later learn, was. The prophecy was wrong, said. The celestial ones never came. Perhaps they were never real, but you are real. You are here, and you have given us something more valuable than any prophecy ever promised. What is that? Asked. Proof, replied. Proof that there is goodness in the universe, that somewhere among the stars there are beings who will stand up for what is right, even at the cost of their own lives. Felt tears building in her eyes. She had lost so many friends today, so many brave men and women who would never see Earth again. Part of her had wondered if it was worth it, if anything they had done mattered. Now she had her answer. We didn't do it alone, she said, her voice rough with emotion. My people fought and died for your world. I need you to remember them, all of them, every single one. We will, promised. For as long as they exist, we will remember what humanity did for us. We will tell the story to our children, and they will tell it to their children. 1,000 years from now, 1,000 years from now, your names will still be spoken on this world. He lowered himself slowly to his knees, his ancient body bending with difficulty. Around him, every other did the same. Hundreds of tall, graceful beings kneeling before a small, battered human woman and her handful of survivors. "Thank you," said simply. Stood among her crew, surrounded by aliens showing them respect and gratitude, and she allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in years. Pride. Not pride in victory, not pride in survival, but pride in what humanity had proven itself to be. When tested, when faced with impossible odds and certain death, they had chosen to help. They had chosen to be human. And that was enough. 30 years had passed since the Battle of. The great temple had been rebuilt. It stood taller now than it ever had before, its spires reaching toward the sky like fingers grasping for the stars. The ancient stone had been repaired with new materials, a blend of tradition and human technology that created something neither species could have built alone. At the base of the temple, where had once stood watching his world die, a new structure had been added. It was a memorial wall, stretching for nearly a kilometer, covered with names carved in both script and English letters. 6,217 names, every human who had died in the battle that saved. Today, the valley was filled with people. Thousands had gathered for the ceremony. They wore colorful robes and carried flowers that bloomed only once every decade. Many had traveled from distant continents, crossing oceans and mountains to be here for this sacred day. Among them, moving freely and comfortably, were humans. There were not many humans on, perhaps 3,000 in total, spread across the planet in small communities. Some were descendants of the original fleet crew who had chosen to stay after the battle. Others were scientists and engineers who had come later as the alliance between Earth and grew stronger. Still others were teachers and artists and merchants who had made this alien world their home. Ambassador was one of the descendants. She was 31 years old, born onto a father who had served as an engineer on the Defiance. Her mother had been a communications officer on the Mercury, one of the ships that had been destroyed in the battle, had never known her. She knew her only through stories, through the memorial wall, through the weight of a sacrifice made before she was born. Stood near the front of the gathered crowd, wearing the formal uniform of the United Earth Diplomatic Corps. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style. Her face was calm and composed. She had given many speeches in her years as ambassador, representing humanity to a people who had every reason to love them. But today was different. Today was the remembrance ceremony, held every decade to honor those who had fallen. And today, Elder would speak for what everyone knew would be the last time. He was ancient now, the oldest living, his body barely able to support itself even with the help of modern medicine. His skin was so cracked that light seemed to shine through the gaps. His amber eyes had dimmed until they barely glowed at all. But his mind remained sharp, and his voice, when he chose to use it, still carried the power of centuries. Helped him to the speaking platform. She was an elder herself now, her dark skin showing the first signs of age, her 4 arms moving with practiced grace. She had spent her entire adult life preparing for this day, knowing that when past, she would carry his responsibilities. The crowd fell silent as reached the platform. For a long moment, the ancient elder simply stood there, looking out at the sea of faces before him, and human alike, standing together under a sky that had once been darkened by harvester ships. 30 years ago, began, his voice amplified by hidden speakers, I stood on these very steps and watched the end of my world approaching. The harvesters had destroyed everything we loved. They had killed billions of our people. They were preparing to finish their work and leave nothing behind but an empty husk. He paused, gathering his strength. I prayed for salvation. I believed in the ancient prophecy, in the celestial ones who would descend from the heavens to save us. I expected beings of light and perfection. I expected power beyond imagination. His dim eyes found in the crowd. Instead, the stars sent us humans. A soft murmur passed through the gathering. Even after 30 years, the story never failed to move them. The prophecy described our saviors as perfect beings, continued. It was wrong. The humans who came to save us were not perfect. They were flawed in 1,000 different ways. They had fears and doubts and weaknesses. They were not creatures of light. They were creatures of flesh and blood, as fragile as any beings I have ever seen. He lifted one trembling hand and pointed to the memorial wall. 6,217 of them died that day. They died in burning ships. They died in explosions. They died alone in the cold void of space. They knew they would probably lose. They knew that fighting meant death, and they fought anyway. His voice grew stronger, fueled by emotion. The prophecy said that the celestial ones would save us through power. It was wrong about that too. Humanity did not save us through power. Their ships were weaker than the harvester vessels. Their weapons were primitive. By every measurement of strength, they should have lost. But they won. They won because they had something that could not be measured, something that the harvesters, for all their technology, could never understand. He turned to look directly at the human members of the crowd. They had heart. They had courage. They had an unbreakable belief that some things are worth dying for, that standing up for what is right matters, even when you cannot win, that helping strangers is not just acceptable but necessary. Tears were flowing freely now, from inhumans alike. For 30 years I have tried to understand humanity. I have read their history, their literature, their philosophy. I have spoken with them and learned from them and watched them live among us, and I have come to a conclusion. Smiled, a rare expression that transformed his ancient face. The celestial ones of prophecy were supposed to be perfect, but perfection is cold. Perfection is distant. Perfection does not understand sacrifice because it has never had to sacrifice anything. Humanity is not perfect. Humanity is messy and complicated and sometimes terrible, but humanity is also capable of choosing goodness, of choosing sacrifice, of choosing to help even when it costs everything. And that choice, that ability to be imperfect and still reach for something better, is more valuable than any prophecy ever promised. He turned to face the memorial wall one final time. To those who died 30 years ago, your names are carved in stone. Your stories are taught to every child. You are not forgotten. You will never be forgotten. You came as strangers and you stayed as family. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. Thank you, from all the children of born and unborn now and forever. Thank you. He stepped back from the platform and moved forward to support him. The crowd began to applaud, a thunder of appreciation that rolled across the valley like a wave. Ambassador felt a gentle touch on her hand. She looked down to find her partner, an architect named Solon, standing beside her. They had been together for 3 years now, building a life between two cultures, proving through their daily existence that the alliance born in fire could flourish in peace. Your people are strange, Solon murmured, his voice warm with affection. Laughed softly, the same response her mother might have given. You have no idea. Above them, ships patrolled the sky. Human and vessels flew in formation together, guardians of a world that had nearly been destroyed. The harvesters had not returned in 30 years, but everyone knew they were still out there somewhere. The universe was vast and full of dangers, but was no longer alone, and neither was Earth. In the years since the battle, the alliance had grown into something neither species had expected. Trade routes connected the two worlds. Scientists shared discoveries. Artists learned from each other. Young traveled to Earth for education, and young humans came to experience a culture older than human civilization. There were problems, of course, misunderstandings and conflicts, and the inevitable friction that came from two very different species trying to live together. But they worked through them because they remembered what they had almost lost, because they remembered the price that had been paid. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, stayed behind. She walked to the memorial wall and found her mother's name among the thousands carved into the stone. Lieutenant Sara, Communications Officer, UENS Mercury. She had been 28 years old when she died, younger than was now. Touched the carved letters gently. "I hope you're proud," she whispered. "I hope you can see what your sacrifice built. I hope you know that it mattered." The wind carried her words away into the evening air, toward the stars where human ships still sailed, toward a future that her mother had died to create. Behind her, Solon waited patiently. Their friends were gathering for a celebration dinner. Their life was calling them forward. Took one last look at her mother's name, then turned and walked away. She took Solon's hand in hers, human fingers intertwined with one's, and together they went to join the living. The war was over, the legend was written, and the story of humanity among the stars was only beginning.